Welcome to Executive Education in Sustainable Fashion. Today we're talking to one of the leading global authorities on sustainable fashion, Dr. Timo Rissanen. Welcome to the Executive Education Program in Sustainable Fashion. My guest today is Timo Rissanen, Professor Timo Rissanen, and in fact Dr. Timo Rissanen, PhD. Timo, welcome.
Thank you so much.
We were just talking about the fact that this is 10 years since we're sitting in Parsons right now, and it's 10 years since your first interview at Parsons and since you joined the school.
It is indeed.
So Timo is the Associate Dean of the School of Constructed Environments, what's your other titles?
I'm also the Assistant Professor of Fashion Design and Sustainability in the School of Fashion, and also one of the Associate Directors of the Tishman Environment Design Centre at the new school.
And although Timo would never say this, he's a world authority on sustainable fashion.
Thank you.
I mean, the facts are out there.
Maybe one of the sort of longer term scholars. I've been in the field for 15 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So Timo, tell me a little bit about what you do here at Parsons.
So I am a professor, so I teach. I teach in the PFA fashion design program primarily, and also undergraduates across the university. And I also, as part of the Tishman Centre in particular, I work on sustainability initiatives through the new school university as well as at Parsons. And I work a lot on curriculum. So I've worked on curriculum in the School of Fashion, and we've been able to really build sustainability into core curricula across our programs. And I also sort of informally, I'm also a resource for any students who are interested in sustainability, not just in fashion, but they often tend to come to me if they have any.
And your influence extends far beyond just Parsons as well. I mean, you're involved in many different schools around the world, in collaboration with researchers and...
Yeah, I've been very lucky to be able to collaborate with some of the best scholars in the world.
I think we should, just for a moment, explain what working at Parsons means, because Parsons is a very well-known school with 5,000 students, and certainly 10 years ago when you joined, sustainability was an option, and it was an idea that some students embraced. Now it's a requirement.
Yeah.
And the reason that's important is that Parsons turns out people that go on to run big companies. You know, it's one of the most influential design schools in the world, and they're now graduating with an expectation of sustainable thinking.
Absolutely. And that was, you know, when we worked on all of the undergraduate curricula at Parsons, and that was work that you were part of as well, you know, the underlying question that we posed as we were reimagining the curriculum was, what does it mean to be a designer in the 21st century? And sustainability is absolutely essential to the sort of expertise and knowledge that designers have to have now. It's not negotiable anymore.
Yeah, and I think that also it's important to stress that sustainability doesn't just mean using organic fabric.
No.
You know, people typically think of, oh, just use organic fabric and you're sustainable. That's not it at all. You know, it's the method of production and the raw materials and the post-consumer use, etc. Yeah. So talk a little bit about your vision of what sustainability looks like in the fashion industry.
So we have to approach it from a systems perspective for the kind of the reasons that you just pointed out. So, for example, last year we saw some big news stories. Burberry was one. You know, Burberry was in the news last June for burning brand new clothing, about $30 million worth. And you know, I think they were the brave ones because it's actually a widespread practice. They happen to be the ones that ended up in the news for it, but it happens a lot across the board. And I'm glad that it did, because it at least brought something to light that we can now have a conversation about. But going back to your point about organic cotton, some of those things that they were burning might have been organic cotton, and that's when it's like, yeah, what's the good in that?
Well, I remember you made a comment a few years ago that stuck with me. We were talking about organic t-shirts, and you said, we don't really need landfill of organic t-shirts any more than we need it of non-organic t-shirts.
Yeah, and so that points to the underlying system being wasteful in itself, and that to me is also inseparable from the economic system that we're in, that for the most part, I mean there are exceptions, but for the most part values profit and growth over anything else, and that's, I think, part of the reason why we end up with these excesses across the board. Another news story that was big almost exactly 12 months ago was H&M with their $4.3 billion worth of unsold inventory. And that, I think, is another, I mean, the economic system isn't the only cause, but I think it certainly plays a part in us arriving at these huge wastes. And it's not just in fashion either. Amazon was caught destroying brand new goods in Germany last year, things like washing machines and dishwashers, like not just small things, but like white goods, brand new white goods being destroyed. And so I think we're kind of, I call this moment in time peak stuff. Like I don't see a future where we'll have even more stuff, because we also, as individuals, we don't have anywhere to put it. I mean, that's why we now have TV shows that tell us how to get rid of stuff, because we no longer apparently know how to get rid of our stuff ourselves, so we need to watch Netflix and Marie Kondo to get rid of stuff. And even the stuff that brings us joy, you know, we still hire mini storage units to put that stuff.
So I think the challenge here, though, is that the fashion industry is massive. So many millions and millions of people are employed by it, they rely on it for their income, there are companies, and companies exist to make profit.
Yeah.
So the question that I'm always wrestling with, and I think people watching this are going to be intrigued by, is knowing we want to keep everyone employed somehow, knowing we all want to make a living somehow, what are things we can do, what are steps we can take that you've seen happening in the industry that are going to be helpful? I mean, I think about Lego.
Yeah.
Lego recycling their plastic bricks.
Yeah.
You know, it's a wonderful toy. I had it when I was a kid. Now my kids have it, and you can turn the bricks in and they recycle them. And I believe they've had a great year, so they're making a lot of money doing that.
Yeah, and they're also looking at replacing the source of the plastic, because right now it's still coming from petrochemicals, and they also know that there's no future for that, and so they're looking at also renewable sources for the plastic, which is, you know, that those technologies already exist, but sort of scaling them up and making them commercially feasible. And there's still some steps to take. But
the commercially feasible thing is the critical thing here.
It is,
because people look at sustainability and it's a terribly generic term, but they say, well, it's going to cost me more money.
Yeah,
and that's when they stop.
Yeah, and some things will end up costing more money. I mean, I think there's certain non-negotiables. I think having chemicals in the sort of fashion value chain, chemicals that cause cancer, chemicals that cause birth defects, those should be non-negotiable, like across the board. And there's great work happening there. I mean, some of it is from like NGOs, pressure from NGOs like Greenpeace. You know, they've been able to exert pressure on different brands in making changes in the sort of chemical landscape.
Well, that's where I think when globalization can actually be a positive, because if one segment of the market requires certain criteria, the rest of it, if you want to sell a product to the whole world, you've got to satisfy that criteria, which means by default, other countries are going to get a good thing.
Absolutely, and I think that is one example, and the other non-negotiable for me is a living wage for everybody in the value chain. You know, often. Well, not often, but on occasion I've heard it the sort of cheapest fashion being justified that, you know, certain people couldn't afford clothing otherwise, and I find it problematic that we're using the kind of semi-slavery of one group of people to justify access to clothing to another. Like that, to me, is not a solution, and we need to look at the bigger picture, how to make the whole system work for both of those groups. So making sure that some people have a living wage from working in the global fashion system, and also that there's equitable access to fashion.
Well, I think the living wage thing is important as well, because, you know, people sometimes talk about a minimum wage. I don't know what that means around the world, because it's different. You know, we have different expectations in different countries, and that can be okay if it's a living wage.
Yeah, and often those two are not the same thing. So a country or even a place like New York City might have a minimum wage, you know, stipulated by law, but that doesn't always amount to a living wage, meaning that people can actually, you know, house themselves and feed themselves, and also put their children to school.
So when I used to work for Nike, and we would travel around the world looking for production, and we had absolute standards on who we'd work with and who we wouldn't. You know, and yes, there are sometimes problems, but in theory, you had standards, and you said we won't work with factories that don't provide a living wage, etc. And that, and my point is that at the inside the industry level, we understand it. We know it. And as a designer, I wouldn't work with a factory that I didn't, you know, I visited and didn't like it. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't work with that company. I don't think the consumer yet gets that. Because if I look at, you know, my daughter, for instance, she goes shopping in various high street stores. Yeah. Some of them, I don't know what their perspective on living wages is, you know, and I'm not comfortable with their shopping there. So I feel like and I want to know your response to this, but I feel like the more the consumer gets educated about what companies are doing, the more discerning they can be. They'll make decisions. They'll say, right, I'm not shopping in that store anymore because I don't know what they do.
Yeah, and I would encourage consumers to also let companies know. Because if you're boycotting a store, but you're not telling them that you're doing that, there's actually very little value in that. But if you actually let the company know that I did some research on you and I have a problem with the labor conditions in your production facilities, and until you deal with it, I'm not actually buying anything from you. I think that does have value. I've spoken with a few brands who've said that when they have had not just one consumer, but when they have a wave of consumers contacting them, they actually do react to it and respond to it.
It is amazing. You hear this a lot, and I don't think it still resonates, but it's amazing the change you can make with a relatively small number of people. Because in the end, if you're the only one saying anything, then you're the only voice they hear.
Yeah. And I remember reading a study that looked at kind of how change starts to happen, any kind of societal change, and it's actually a very small group. I think it was somewhere in the region of 5% of the population starts to do something, and you can start to drive real societal change. So
I think I'm inspired by the possibilities in China, and this video is actually created in a large part for the Chinese industry, because so many of the companies there are very large and they're still founder run.
Yeah.
They don't have a huge board to satisfy, so they have a founder that can say, right, I'm going to do this now.
Yeah.
And I visited, again in my previous days with Nike and other companies, I visited factories where the founder still runs it.
Yeah.
And they said, I like looking after people. I like providing basketball courts and paid holiday and stuff like that. So that's what I do. And I find that very inspiring. And I think the more information that gets shared about that, the more the expectation is going to rise that companies should do it.
Yeah, and I am, even though at times things get a bit overwhelming, I am still an optimist, and I do believe that most people are inherently good. And that's when when you have one-on-one conversations with people, you usually discover that. There are the exceptions, like I will name Martin Shkreli, the former pharmaceutical boss who put up the price of a particular
the most hated
drug.
man in America for a long time. Yeah.
I think he's in prison now.
Yes, he is.
So,
tax evasion or something.
Yeah. So I think people like that are the exception. Most people are actually good and want to look after others as well. And the one thing that I do think that sort of societally we need to deal with, that we don't talk about enough, in my opinion, is greed. Because I think there is still a kind of like, even if we don't say it out loud, we seem to be okay with greed. And greed is a kind of a quality that we, I think, should be resisting more collectively.
So here's an idea. What about if someone was greedy for good?
Well, then I'd be all for it. As long as there was literally nobody, whether it's human life or other life, suffering unnecessarily from that.
Right.
But I absolutely do think that we need to amplify the good while we're also...
because that to me speaks to one of the biggest problems I see in sustainability, which is getting people to do anything.
Yeah.
Because we already know we're right. We know we've got to be sustainable. We know that global warming is a reality, it's happening. We know that sustainability is possible and profitable.
Yeah.
But people still are like, no, I'm fine, I'm doing what I'm doing, So what have you seen that encourages you, examples of companies that see something and think, actually, this is the right thing to do, but also make more money doing it?
There's many examples. One of the more inspiring ones, at least sort of conceptually, was the formation of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, because that's where you had these really big brands who traditionally are competitors coming together and just having a shared conversation that yes, we need to work together on this. And Nike was actually the company that gave up their material sustainability index for everyone to use. Research that they'd done privately, and behind closed doors they made that information available to all of the members. And it's those kinds of actions that I think make a huge difference, because actually knowledge, I think, is one of the key things. And it's also one of the issues that we need to solve, is who has access to knowledge.
Yeah.
Because there's those of us who think that everybody should have access to knowledge. I heard of a student shared with me yesterday that just because of a student project that they had worked on, they got a cease and desist letter from 2 companies. and to me that's heartbreaking, because we should be encouraging innovation among our students. And this student had been asked to speak about their work at conferences and things, and these two companies saw that and told him to stop talking about it.
Yeah, there's no underestimating corporate greed.
No.
But there are companies that are doing the right thing and doing really well at it. And I if there's any reason for this conversation, I want to inspire people to look for positive opportunities to run their business better, more efficiently, more profitably, more successfully by doing good.
Yeah, and also, allowing yourself to screw some things up. I think H&M is a delightful example in that way, because they have been in this conversation for a long time now, like close to a decade of sustainability. And they've been able to do some real things inside of that conversation. And then they still, like the news story that I mentioned, they end up with $4.3 billion worth of unsold inventory. So they still have work to do as well. But nonetheless, they are doing it in a way that most other brands of their size aren't. And
well, I've spent a lot of time with them, and they're open. They'll talk about it, and they'll sit on a panel where they're going to get ripped apart. They're like, we want to learn. If we did something wrong, we'll admit it, and we'll try and do better. And they're huge, and they're successful. Yeah,
and so I think much as they're easy to criticize, and I do criticize them at times, I also do admire them, because it would have been very easy for them to also kind of just shut it all down and take it all behind closed doors after the sort of initial criticism. And yet they, like you've just said, they're very open about the things that they do, and they do a lot more than they publicly say as well, because I know some of the people that have consulted with them, and I know that there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes that we'll learn about in coming years.
Well, I think that's something that's really important to take away from this conversation. So for anyone that's watching that's involved in manufacturing or raw material production, H&M, when they get together with Zara and with Uniqlo and with Nike and Adidas and Walmart and the other big players, once they get together and they actually come to a decision, you're going to have to get with it.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to sell to any of those at any level of the production chain if you're not doing the right thing. And I think being aware of what the right thing is, which means doing a bit of study and talking to people like you, and then changing your business to adapt to that, because there's no question it's coming in the future.
Yeah.
The question is, do you want to get left behind, or do you want to be still profitable?
Yeah, and in my view, we have a clock ticking now. I mean, the IPCC report that came out in October of 2018 gave us 12 years to really radically act on climate change, and we are now at 11 years. And if we don't take that seriously, there won't be a fashion industry for us to care about in 20 years from now, because the potential negative implications will have impacts on, cotton farming, wool production, and all kinds of resources that the industry relies upon. And so we need to act, and I do think that there's never been a better time for really bold action. And one company that I really admire for that is Eileen Fisher, because in 2015 they basically published this, I think it was called Sustainability 2020 or something like that, but it was a 5-year plan. Like they said, in 5 years we're going to be fully sustainable, without having a clear idea of how they were going to get there. But they just, and it was very much to do with the leader, with Eileen Fisher herself. And I do think that it takes bold leaders to drive that kind of change. And they are, I visited several times, and they're working really hard behind the scenes. They might not meet all of their goals. That's okay, because you can then set new goals and just keep doing the work, learn from the mistakes you might make along the way, but also celebrate the successes. And they've been, I think, quite good at that, because they've even rethought some of their manufacturing completely, where we have, one of our alumni is working on a sort of a sub-brand where they make new clothing out of old clothing that has been donated by their customers, and so they've created a whole new supply chain in New York State for that. And it's small within the overall company, but they're also sharing the information very widely, so it comes back to the knowledge sharing again. They take tours to anyone that wants to come, including their competitors. Yeah,
that's a really interesting point. People who are pioneers in sustainability tend to be nice. And they're doing it because they think it's the right thing to do. Yes. So they want to share the information. This is not like, I've figured out how to be sustainable, so I'm going to patent it, and you're not allowed to copy me. No, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
If you figure something out, you share it.
Yeah, for the most part, it has been like that. And and I do think that, and I get the tension. I think it's important to acknowledge the tensions that that, you know, sometimes there is a tension between knowledge sharing or information sharing and the need to actually make a profit.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answers to that either, and I think it needs to be acknowledged. But whenever it is feasible to share the information, share the information. And that's where academics like me, we are in a privileged position because we're not, we're not bound by the need to make a profit from our work because we are already employed.
Yeah.
And so I've, with my doctoral research and my research since, I've made all of the information public, including sometimes sharing journal articles that you're not supposed to share because the publishers want to control who has access to those articles.
Right,
and there's a whole other
yeah.
sort of mechanism there that I do want to push against as well.
Well, I think you have a unique position as well in that you're aware of the industry. You know, you've been a designer, you understand the realities. Because one of the things that I know that people are going to be watching this thinking, yeah, but how does that affect my business? I'd love to be sustainable, I can't afford it. You don't realise I've got to make a bottom line. I've got to pay, you know, how many thousands of people. And you've seen that in real life. I want to talk about your the Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion. But before we come to that, I just want to talk about shaking up the fashion business. You know, the fashion business, there are several different structures within it, whether it's the seasonal thing or the multi-delivery each season, and there's the bricks and mortar retail and there's the online thing, but it's all pretty set, everyone knows what it is. And it's not really sustainable, with a small s, because it's just old news. So then for me, you look at the Real, which I think is a great example of reselling. What they do is they resell nice clothes at a decent margin.
Yeah.
So, and then there's Rent the Runway.
Yeah.
You know, then I used to live in Hong Kong, and there's these little stores called Paris Metro and Milan Metro, and they resold expensive designer handbags.
Yeah.
So that exists, and it's a big profit. I mean, Real's got valued at $1 billion.
Yeah.
You know, it's big business. So that, to me, they're shaking up the industry. What else have you seen?
Well, connected to that, both Eileen Fisher and Patagonia, they also sell second-hand versions of their own goods. So they take things back from their customers. When their customers don't want something, they say, bring it back to us. And anything that they can, after cleaning, sell as is, they will. And both Patagonia and Eileen Fisher, they've partnered with a company called Yodel that does the back end, because it's quite complex to make the selling of second-hand goods as easy and convenient as the selling of new. So if you go on the Wornwear Patagonia website, it looks like any old online clothing store, except everything is second-hand. And I think that to me is brilliant, because that was unimaginable even, I think, 5 years ago.
Right.
To have, second-hand was kind of going into slightly
like
smelly
store,
slightly smelly store, and like having to shift through things to find a treasure. Whereas Patagonia and Eileen Fisher, they've made it really easy for their customers, and I think that is key. And so has
so that I'm intrigued by how that's going to resonate in China, because they don't do second-hand clothes in China. There are no thrift stores. It's just not what you do. People don't. That's not who they are.
Yeah.
But you know, a Louis Vuitton handbag is a Vuitton handbag, whether someone else had it before you or not. Yeah. It's still posh. So from that on down, I wonder how. It seems like there's a huge opportunity there.
There is, and actually, one of my students right now is working on that. She's from China.
Right.
She's lived here in the US for a number of years, even before she started at Parsons, and she talks about that fact that in China secondhand is quite taboo, whereas her Chinese community in New York, they all go thrift shopping, and so she wants to kind of see how she can facilitate a conversation with her communities in China and between here, to open up the conversation and find out what might be the strategies to make secondhand, socially acceptable.
Well, we need a new name for it. I mean, the pre-love thing to me is a little bit. But I'll go with it until someone comes up with a better one. But we need to do better.
Yeah, because you don't always know that it was loved,
pre-hated, pre-tolerated. So look, recently on January the 1st, actually, I think you founded the union along with some colleagues. You founded the Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion.
Yeah.
Why'd you do that, and what is it?
So it started at a conference in London, at London College of Fashion in November 2018. Linda Gross was one of the keynote speakers, and she finished her keynote with a call to form a Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion, modelled on the Union of Concerned Scientists, which was formed 50 years ago in response to the proliferation of nuclear weapons. There was a group of scientists who felt that their scientific work was being misused for purposes that they hadn't intended. And there were 3 of us in the audience at that conference who took Linda very literally. And we grouped immediately afterwards and said, yes, let's form this union. The other colleagues are Kate Fletcher, who's a professor at the Centre for Sustainable Fashion at London College of Fashion, and Matilda Tam, who's a professor at Goldsmiths College, also in the UK. And all 3 of them, Linda, Kate and Matilda, they have been in this research for much longer than me. Linda for 30 years, from when she was at Esprit. She was really the first mainstream designer to do a sustainable collection for Esprit back in '92. And Kate and Matilda have both been in the work for over 20 years. So what we want to be for the world is be a resource, but also we want to facilitate a kind of networking, because what we also saw at that conference in November was replication of already completed research. So we saw junior researchers doing work that we knew other people had done 10 years ago. And we don't have time for that anymore.
Yeah.
Like I said, the clock is ticking. We've got 11 years to figure stuff out, and we don't have time to have people do the same work more than once. And so we also want to be a resource in that way, and those of us who've been in this field a bit longer help the more junior researchers to find what has already been done, and also work with brands eventually to make sure that research is used in a productive way and not as sort of commodified and harnessed for, in some cases, very selfish purposes.
So I know that there's a great appetite for free knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so, if I think about people that are watching this in China with maybe large industries, they're looking at that thinking, all right, so I see that sustainability is important for my bottom line because people are going to expect it. I really need some knowledge. And it sounds like what you're going to be researching, particularly where I love the idea of encouraging people to not repeat what's already been done.
Yes.
So if there's going to be a repository of knowledge that they can use to actually apply it, that's going to be wonderful.
Yeah.
So what should they do? I mean, how would they go about starting to learn from what you're doing and apply that?
I mean, they could contact us. I mean, I will say that the union itself will not work as a consultancy. We were very clear that we wouldn't do that, but we can certainly point, brands and different people in the right directions, or what we feel is the right direction, because between the 4 of us and also between the 200 people who've signed the manifesto so far, there is an incredible body of knowledge that is represented by the 200 signatories, and it's starting to be a global network as well. I mean, we've had people from Nigeria, Tunisia, and Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth, and a number of South American countries as well signed the manifesto, and that was our hope, to build this global network as well.
And to be clear, this goes beyond just like what people think of as fashion.
Yeah.
It's into the supply chain and the raw materials, etc.
Yeah, absolutely, across the board. So even between the 4 of us founders, our expertise is quite different. Linda has worked with the cotton industry in California for about 30 years, so she's extremely knowledgeable about the different issues with cotton production. Both Kate and Matilda are real systems thinkers, so they really think in big systems, and I have really robust design expertise on sort of what that work can look like on a very concrete level for a fashion designer.
I think you've hit something very important there as well, which is designing systems. Because often sustainability is not about using organic, materials. It's about making a more sustainable system.
Yeah.
Creating less waste, which everyone wants to achieve.
Yeah, and I even talk about the economic system as a design project. That we need to redesign the economic system. The economic system that we currently have is not something that came into existence with the universe after the Big Bang. We made it. There's parts of it that we didn't necessarily design by intention, but nonetheless it's something that humans created, and to me that's the good news, because we can also redesign it. I do think that we need a completely new conversation around economics, because we're still, I think in my view, our imagination is too limited by the binary that we always go to, which is capitalism versus socialism, and I think that's too narrow a frame to think about economics. I think we need a completely new language for economics.
I think when you look at, one of the things that gives me a little bit of encouragement is Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock. So $3 trillion under advisement, in the biggest fund in the world. So in theory, the most powerful guy financially in the world. And he for the last 2 years, he said to all of his people, if you're not addressing climate change, I will unseat you. Now, that may not affect the people that are watching this in terms of Chinese companies, but the biggest investor in the world has said we are addressing climate change. Therefore, it's got to be important. He may not care about it, but he knows it's important.
Yeah.
If I think about the people that are watching this, many of them may be first-generation entrepreneurs that have built big companies, and maybe the next generation, their children, are going to take over.
Yeah.
Certainly, I've come across many companies in China where they want their children to take over. They're the people we've got to help. The good news is many of them went to this school, Parsons, and they've learned about sustainability, and they've gone back with Mum, Dad, we've got to do something about this.
Yeah.
What have you seen that is giving you some sort of optimism, some sort of inspiration? Because, 11 years and was all over. You know, I mean, for you and for me, I'm old, so but 11 years I'll be fine.
I think we're about the same. But actually, you just said what gives me optimism, which is the students. And Chinese students are now the largest group of international students that we have. And
that wasn't the case 10 years ago.
No, that's changed quite dramatically in the last 10 years. And to me, there's a huge opportunity there, and I'm constantly inspired by the conversations that I have with those students, like the one I just mentioned, who wants to look at the second-hand culture in China. 2 years ago, I had a student who very bluntly said, I want to make the Chinese fashion industry sustainable. And so that is the kind of underlying goal for all of the work that he does. He's still in New York, but I think he's eventually planning to move back to China and take the knowledge with him.
Do you have people in China joined the union?
There have been a few signatories. We could definitely do with more.
And are there people over there that are doing good work that you're aware of?
There are a few, and that's where we need to do research. I mean, this has been a very kind of grassroots effort. We emailed a couple of people and said, can you share this with a couple more? So I think we've had 2 small news articles written about us, which we're very grateful for, but we've really done very little outreach so far, and we got to 200, which was more than we expected. We thought that like 10 friends would sign it.
Well, these are 200 very influential people.
In an academic sense, yeah. But I also recognize that there is still a kind of a tension between academia and business that we need to also address from both sides. I mean, I don't think it's, there's issues from both sides.
Well, the thing that I think that industry's missing is in other industries, like in pharmaceuticals, they actually work with academia to develop products which they then monetize. Which makes sense. Everyone knows that's how it goes. You have research centres inside academia. The same can be true in design. Certainly, it has been in our lifetime. So I would encourage any industry, any people watching this, executives, to find ways to engage with universities, because there are things happening there that can benefit you.
Absolutely.
And if you're 100% executive and you're all about profit, I get it. That's okay. But you can do that with an eye on the future and embrace sustainability in a profitable way.
Absolutely. And there's some great examples of that. I visited Aalto University in Helsinki in Finland about 6 months ago, and they're doing some incredible material research in collaboration with industry. Because, while materials aren't the only part of this, we need to also change our materials, and there is some amazing work happening in that space.
All right, so we're coming to the end. We're going to take questions on WeChat after this, for those of you watching live. But Timo, we've talked about some pretty weighty subjects here. I want to give people a little bit of encouragement. So what have you seen? What should people look at? What gives you, what do you want to leave people with?
I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to say to the young people, if there are young people watching, respect and listen to your elders. But
That's a very Chinese thing. They're definitely going to do that.
But to our generation and older, I'm also going to say we should listen to the children, because the movement that you see happening globally right now, with Greta Thunberg in Sweden, the Sunrise Movement here in the US, the school strikes in Australia and across Europe, we should listen to those children, because I think we have a huge opportunity in really making an intentional, different kind of future for them, and that is the opportunity, and that's the thing that drives me in all of my work, is to leave this world a little bit better than what we found it. So that's what I would finish with.
That's very noble. Well, Timo Rissanen, thank you very much. Please, if you've got any questions, we're on WeChat now, so thanks again.
Thanks so much for having me, Simon.
Thanks for watching. Now join us online and on social media with our experts so we can answer your questions directly and keep this conversation going.